Hi, and welcome to this lecture on environmental adaptation of animals. Now we'll start the second week of this course, and we will deal largely on the energy metabolism. And of course, energy we get from the food. So we will start with the nutrition and feeding and digestion. And let's start with cow and man. Humans have raised cattle for several thousands of years, and we get from the cows we get meat, milk, and feces. And the milk is of course the first thing that gets in the mind when you see a cow, that okay, what kind of product we get. But the problem in the milk is the milk sugar, and there's a variation in human nutrition. So the lactose, the milk sugar, the intolerance depends on the ability to produce lactase enzyme, also in the adulthood. And there's a large variation among ethnic groups, how many adults can produce the lactase. In northern countries, almost everybody can synthesize lactase, also in adulthood. But then in southern Europe, for example, Greek, about half of the population. Then, for example, in African Americans, maybe every fifth person, and then in Native Americans, maybe 5%, etc. So there's a huge variation on are they able to use the milk products or not. And why we have this kind of variation is depending on a single mutation. It's near the promoter area of lactase coding gene that is causing the ability to synthase lactase also in the adulthood. And this mutation is, surprise, surprise, common in the countries where the milk products, for example cheese, is commonly used also in the adult. And this just means that even although the human is very homogenic species, it's still, even within humans, we have a huge difference on the products that we can use for food. So beside the energetic or nutritional value that we can see from the newspapers, it's also that, okay, we must be also able to use the food. And not just us, but also all animals. So it depends quite a lot on the species and on the populations and what kind of enzymes they have, etc. So what can you eat? First of all, we have different kind of food with different kind of nutrition needs or nutritions. So we need some nutritions, and depends on our body functions that, okay, what kind of nutritions we can synthesize. If we can't synthesize something, then we must get it from the food. And then, okay, what kind of food we can eat depends on how large is the mouth, what kind of teeth we have. So what we can eat with this eating apparatus. Okay, after the swallowing the food, then we have the digestive breakdown. We have enzymes in the stomach, enzymes released from pancreas that are cutting the nutritions in smaller parts. And there is also species-dependent variation, and as you saw in the previous slide, that also population between variation on what kind of digestive enzymes we can use. And then we can also expand the digestion, because we can't digest, don't have enzymes for digesting everything. So that's why we have also fermentive breakdown. So what kind of microbes does exist in our intestine that could cut, for example, long plant sugars in smaller pieces. And then after cutting it in smaller pieces, then it depends on what kind of transporter we have in the epithelia. So what kind of nutritions we can absorb to the circulation. And after that, we can get the nutritions delivered to our cells. And of course, that affects that, okay, there's a negative feedback that, okay, did the food meet the nutritional need? If it didn't, okay, then next time the animal probably will eat something else. Okay, what do we have in our body? The main of our body is mainly produced by water. But there's still quite a lot of proteins and lipids. This is the average weight, 70 kilogram person. It contains maybe 12 kilogram of proteins and 10 kilograms of fat. Well, my body is a little bit overweight, so more probably I have more fat than proteins. And these proteins are formed, surprise, surprise, by amino acids that are used just in time. So you don't have storages for these amino acids. And then we have lipids that are actually a large repertoire of all kind of hydrophobic molecules. But in this case, we mostly talk on phospholipids and fatty acids, and perhaps a little bit on cholesterol. And these fatty acids we can store as triacylglycerol. And let's see first on the proteins. We have some essential amino acids. There's about 20 standard amino acids that are producing that are elements of our proteins, but actually people have characterized over 200 amino acids in the organisms, but most of them are not in the proteins. And about half of these 20 we can synthesize in the cells, and about 10 is needed from the outside. And these are the essential amino acids. And the number of these essential amino acids vary between species. So depending on what kind of literature you read, you can see that, okay, we have certain amino acids that are essential for rat, but actually of these, arginine is not essential for human at all. Histidine, it's only for children. Adults can produce it. And then we have these isoleucine, etc., that are essential. We don't have the processes to produce them in our body. But even then, although we have half of the amino acids, or these standard amino acids we can synthesize, even then we can synthesize it from other amino acids. So that's why we need the protein supply all the time. Otherwise we will not be able to synthesize new proteins. And what about then if we eat a lot of cheese or eat a real good steak? We get too many amino acids. So what does happen for those amino acids that we are not using at the moment? It can be modulated to pyruvate and used either for directly on energy metabolism or stored as a glycogen. So we don't store these amino acids at all. We use it for energy metabolism. And that's why having a very high protein, eating a lot of proteins, it doesn't mean that, okay, you have more these elements for building new proteins, but it's actually using, we can still use proteins and then get a lot of energy or a lot of glycogen, so meaning a sugar. And this actually, at the same time, we will have some ammonia as a side product. And this waste is excreted by kidneys. Let's go on that side a little bit later. And interesting is that, okay, this nitrogen actually is a limited element in many ecosystems. So that's why it's very interesting that, okay, it's just a waste product. And although we must get a lot of work to get enough nitrogen in our body, and now we are just wasting it. Then we have a large group of lipids, and in the food it practically means the fatty acids and their derivative like triacylglycerol. And of these, the fatty acids differ in the length and the amount of double bonds or the location of the double bonds. And most of them can be synthesized from carbohydrates and proteins, all stored in fatty cells. But still, we animals, we cannot form certain double bonds in the fatty acid, and that's why omega-3 and omega-6 are essential fatty acids for us. But in comparison, certain cats, certain fish, they require quite specific fatty acid cocktail for proper work. So, sorry. So it means that, okay, depending on what kind of animal we study, some are very, for some animals, it's very important that they have right repertoire of these lipids also. And the good point in the lipids is that it's a very great energy store. There's much more energy per weight than in other biomolecules per gram. And that's why it's a very good energy store for migrating bird. So you don't have to get a lot of body weight, but you can get more energy per gram, or in the fasting animals. But the problem also is that, okay, the fatty acid catabolism happens by beta oxidation in the mitochondria, and that's why it needs oxygen. So this lipid storage is actually useless if there's no oxygen available. But in heavy exercise, long-lasting exercise, this fat is just the best. Over here we have John Scott expedition on South Pole in beginning of 20th century. On the right hand side you can see what kind of food they were having. They were having proteins, they were having fat, etc. But the problem is that when the ponies died in the beginning of this expedition, so the energy need was increasing because now they have to carry everything with them, and that's why the body mass was decreasing. So there was energy intake was less than the energy consumption, and that's why in the end of this expedition practically everybody died. Perhaps if they would have taken more fat with them, they would have survived. Okay, beside proteins and these fatty acids, we also have these carbohydrates, meaning sugars. And there is a relatively low concentration in our body, but they have essential role as structural elements, energy storage, and energy transport. And so we can add these carbohydrate groups in lipids or proteins to provide some structural support and shape of cells. But also we can use them to identify, for example, what kind of cells we have. Then we can store the sugars, meaning glucose, as a glycogen in the tissue. And it has two very good properties that the lipid storage don't have. It's fastest used, and that's why it's used in the brains. And it can be also used without the oxygen. So that's why we have glycogen in the skeletal muscle. And over here you can see electron microscope figure of fish heart. And it's thicker. There's mitochondria there on the top, and then there are a lot of these black dots. And all these dots are glycogen. It's full of glycogen, and it can be used without the oxygen in the winter. And surprise, surprise, this was the semi-hibernating cruising carp. And one thing that is also good in glycos, because it's hydrophilic. So that's why it's the way to transport the energy in the circulation. So you, for example, in the your So one thing that is good in the glycos, it's also a good way to transport energy in the circulation. So that's why you have a lot of glycogen in your liver. And then you cut it in smaller pieces as a glucose and release it in the circulation and use it in other places. Then, beside this, we also have a huge variation of different kind of vitamins. And they were found a little bit over 100 years ago, where in a test that, where the mice were eating carbohydrate, lipids, proteins, and salt. And the mice didn't survive this experiment. And they found that, there are some essential elements that are needed. And actually, we humans or other animals, we are quite opportunist in these essential vitamins. There is a variety of compounds that we must get because we are not able to produce these molecules. And good example of this is retinol. So we need vitamin A, that it's produced only in the plants, so it's in carotenoids, and so that's why we must eat the carrot or the rabbit that ate the carrot. And the interesting is that, without this vitamin A, we can't see. And there's also variation on what are the vitamins that we need. So all the animals on this planet practically needs all the B vitamins because they are fundamental biochemical processes. But still, then these hydrophobic vitamins, they are needed practically only on vertebrates. What kind of vitamins we have? This is some kind of list of some water-soluble vitamins, and you can see that, in several of these B vitamins, they are on oxidative reactions or oxidation reduction, for example in FAD or NAD that we will focus a little bit later on the energy metabolism, or then on coenzyme A synthesis or nucleic acid synthesis. So all kind of stuff that is essential for all the biochemical processes that we have in the basic level courses. And then we have these lipid-soluble vitamins that are more specific. So vitamin I is in the light-activating component of visual pigment, so we need it for vision. It's also in the bone growth and reproduction, so needed for synthesis of sperm. And then the cell membrane, so regulation of gene transcript. Then the vitamin D, it's working like a hormone on a specific receptor, and it's affecting on calcium metabolism and phosphorus metabolism. And then we have vitamin A, that is antioxidant like the vitamin C, but it's also affecting on the phospholipids. And then vitamin K, that has specific role in blood clotting. So if we have any wound and there will be blood leaking, we want to get the blood clotting, so close the wound. And for that we need vitamin K. Thank you.